So in my previous video, I've mentioned that I decided to get rid of projectiles for the attacks, and just quickly again, the reason behind that is I don't have I couldn't find any solid way of detecting what the projectile is actually hitting. The projectile itself has no object output, so and there was no way that um, I could actually figure out in Kismet, like, how do you actually detect the object that you've hit? The one, the one thing I tried to do is to compare stuff against the list, but you would essentially have to list the whole world in one side, or be able. Let me put it this way: I couldn't figure out how to test against the list with the whole world. That's essentially what you would have to do it like that, and that could also work. And maybe there is a way of doing that, but I couldn't find it. So I actually went back to doing it my my original method. I did tweak a little bit, so um, just to simplify the actual node, just the amount of nodes used to accomplish it. So originally I had over here I had all three traces running in a separate sequence, and all sequences doing basically the same thing. And this is a combination of everything, and this seems to work really solidly. So I've decided to keep this just to keep the simplified node setup. It's not 100% perfect, as you can see. I'm basically overriding node values uh, by each trace, and um, so that's really where the problem comes in, and the way I ended up solving that was just to delay the other two traces. So yeah, so to start, I actually run that sequence from the attack. So as soon as you attack, I run the trace at the point of attack, at the point where the punch should land or the kick should land. So I call the trace event, and again, like I've actually shown this trace setup. Just go quickly over it again. I've got the trace setup like this, where I've got a start offset of 100, so it doesn't trace at the character's feet. It traces closer to the character's head. The trace starts, and then I've got these. I spawn basically these points. They're just kind of empty particle system emitters. So um, just as a point of where the trace should, the trace target. So I spawn them in there, and then I attach them to the character, and I I attach them, and I also use the relative offset, which is 130 units, and it's just a little bit further than what I actually need. And then I also make it 80 units off the ground, and this one is 45 degrees um, to the left, I think. Mine is Y there, so it's the same there, and then this one's off to the right. And you'll see I also orient these, and the reason for that is I spawn the particles, and actually I originally I originally used these angles to spawn the particles at, but I've actually since then decided to do it a slightly different way, which ultimately worked a bit better for me. So anyway, that's what that's about. And call the trace, it'll trace from the player to one of those targets, right? So it's 3 traces, and then I gather all the information. I get the object that's hit, and this is the important part. This is how I distinguish world from enemy. And I get the trace distance, and I use that to set the length. So when you do a punch, the length is a little bit shorter because your reach is shorter, and when you kick, it's a little bit longer because the reach. And I also get the location, so I can spawn some particle systems. This is where I basically set the distance. So I've got a punch distance there, which I've got on my variables here. So the punch distance is 90, and the trace is tested against that. And if it's closer than 90, so if it's smaller than 90, the trace distance, then do the following. So nothing happens unless you are in reach of the player. So the first thing I do is I get the player rotation, and I use that to spawn the particle at a specific orientation, so I can have directional effects. I decided to do it directly on the player because 99% of the time the player will be facing in the direction that I want the particle to happen. So I figured that's a pretty that's a good way of getting that. So that happens, then I do a test again, and this test is basically the same I've shown in a few of my previous videos, where I distinguish between enemy or world. So the list I use there is created over here. So the enemy spawns in, and I add them to a list, and you'd think that the list here would contain all the enemies that get spawned in, but I found that it doesn't. So okay, so I spawn the enemy, I add it to the list, and I use the list to test and make sure that I'm hitting an enemy. So that's the spawned enemy list, and the punch current object, which is this guy here. So the trace hits something. If it finds an enemy, it plays this effect, and it modifies the health of that enemy. If it does not find an enemy, it plays this effect, which means it's a world object. So that's how I'm doing the attacks now, and I find it works pretty well. So and I can get, at least I can get the ability to detect who I'm punching and kicking at, so I can have separate effects, and that's really what it's all about, is to get the separate effects out. This stuff basically stays the same. This is where the ragdoll spawns in when the enemy dies, and I've covered this in an older video. The only thing I ended up modifying on this to make it work just a little bit better, I used to have a really small delay in here, 0.1 I think, or 0.01 or something like that. I took that out completely, and that seems to, because I ran into situations where This didn't update yet because of the delay. Actually, I think that this delay was 0.5, and actually the retrigger delay is 0.5, but there was an extra delay node in here, which I think I was right before. I think it was 0.1 or something like that. But anyway, um, what the situation that I ran into was that this did not update yet, unlike a split second where I kill someone with someone else or something like that. Now I still have situations where the ragdoll sometimes do not spawn in. I'm not exactly 100% sure why, but it's where it used to work maybe at about 95%, now it works maybe at about 99%. So yeah, it's a step in the right direction. It's not perfect yet, but uh, yeah, it's a lot better than it used to be. Okay, so in the in the next video, I'll explain the setup quickly. It's just a setup that I use to destroy the ragdolls over a certain period of time. So I'll jump over to the next one.